From the ancient lands of the rising sun to the modern marvels of technology and tradition, Japan's story is one of resilience, innovation, and cultural richness. A nation that defied colonization, embraced transformation, and rose to become a global powerhouse. But how did this island nation, isolated by the vast Pacific, carve its unique path in history? From the first encounters with European explorers to the rise of the samurai, from the shadows of war to the dawn of economic miracles. Japan's journey is a testament to its unyielding spirit. Join us as we unravel the fascinating tale of how Japan remained uncolonized, shaped its destiny, and became the nation we know today. The origins of Japanese civilization are ancient and somewhat unclear. Studies suggest that the first peoples came from Siberia and made contact with the lands of the Japanese archipelago. Around the century before Christ, some ancestral cultures, such as the Yayoi and Kofun, traversed the Japanese soil. The political unification of Japan is believed to have occurred during the Yamato dynasty, notable for the emergence of a centralized state from the 3rd century AD. In the following century, local leaders gained more power, and conflicts over limited land became increasingly evident. The Yamato dynasty established its influence and restored monarchical governance. The monarchy maintained its hegemony for nearly a millennium, and samurais gained strength as military and political agents. In the modern age, commercial relations and great navigations became increasingly frequent. The main protagonists of the colonizing routes were countries located in Europe or Asia. The primary goal was to inhabit previously unexplored territories to extract maximum resources, allowing the economic rise of these countries. Thus, various territories across different continents became colonies. There were two possibilities. Either you were a colony, or you held colonizing power. A question that intrigues many scholars is understanding why countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Thailand, and Japan, for example, were not subjected to foreign authorities. In Japan's case, some motivations are justifiable, but the most notable is the fact that it was itself, at some point in its history, a colonial empire. Additionally, Japan is an island located in the Pacific Ocean, separated from the east coast of Asia by the Sea of Japan, with a territory of approximately 377,975 square kilometers. The Japanese population is estimated at 126 million, making it the 11th most populous country in the world. However, with the reduction in immigration and fertility rates among women in recent years, the outlook is that this scenario will reverse, leading to a population decline in the coming decades. The Japanese Empire began to look outward in the late 19th century. Korea was one of the territories that came under Japanese crown possession thanks to the treaty signed at the end of the First Sino-Japanese War. This war occurred due to the attempt to control the Korean peninsula by both China and Japan. The Japanese managed to occupy Korea and advanced into Manchuria in northeastern China. Both countries suffered significant historical losses in the conflict, and the brutality of the Japanese army in the Second Sino-Japanese War marked the political distancing between the two countries. In this process, Japan allied with Western colonial powers in an attempt to expand throughout East Asia. During the 20th century, Japan managed to seize Sakhalin Island and some colonial territories from Germany. These incursions marked Japan as a potential colonizer, not a colony. Only after its defeat in World War II was Japan forced to withdraw from the provinces it had conquered in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. This means that for about 50 years, the reason Japan was not colonized was simply because it was the one playing the role of colonizer. Although this explanation seems obvious and is a good argument, the colonial era had begun centuries earlier. In this context, what kept intruders at bay? Well, Japan was not entirely free from European interference. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to land in Japan. A group of Portuguese merchants ran aground on the Japanese coast, and a new relationship between Japan and Portugal began to grow, primarily focused on the economy. But religion quickly became a relevant aspect on Japanese soil. The Portuguese brought the influence of Christianity, and priests began converting the Japanese. Some daimyos, feudal lords who held power in Japan, became Catholic for various interests. The feudal lords converted not only for religious motivation, but also because they were interested in the imports of military products brought by the Portuguese, especially materials for making gunpowder. Colonialism had enough strength to unite two different worlds. The French philosopher Frantz Fanon constructed a unique perspective on colonizing actions. There is no colonial system that does not offer violent practices. The internalization of an inferiority complex on the oppressed side means that in many situations, the colonized, lacking other options, ends up submitting to the colonizer voluntarily. According to Fanon, repression may not be explicitly violent and can appear under aspects of religious and economic domination. Thus, the dominated yields to the exploitation of the other. For Fanon, there is no possibility for these two subjects to live together. The colonized must seek their own humanity and aspire to the possibility of achieving independence. In Japan's case, there was an initial period where trade driven by Portuguese influence was beneficial. Most of Japan's commercial products came from China, which had long been outside Japan's reach. This means the Portuguese had something the Japanese really wanted, but couldn't obtain on their own. It was a perfect system. For several decades, the Japanese could buy goods like silk and porcelain from China without having to go directly through Chinese merchants, and at the same time, the Portuguese could expand. Shortly after their arrival, the Portuguese also instituted the slave trade. This trade was based on the purchase of Japanese citizens, especially women. After being bought, these women were sold to Europeans abroad. A 10-year-old Japanese boy was kidnapped and sold to a Portuguese merchant operating in Nagasaki. The boy, known as Gaspar Fernandez, became a domestic servant for the Perez family. Researchers believe he was sold by his own Japanese family to the Portuguese family. This demonstrates how, in situations of economic interest, the colonized often acted unfavorably toward their own people. Gaspar was one among thousands of adults, children, men, and women captured in Japan between the late 16th and early 17th centuries. The victims were kidnapped from the most disadvantaged layers of society, then chained and pushed onto ships. The Japanese were forced to leave their country and families to suffer abuse and torture in foreign lands. There are no exact data on how many Japanese were enslaved and exported worldwide during a gap of at least 50 years. But researchers estimate that thousands of Japanese were subjected to this market, which operated illegally and covertly in southern Japan. The slave market did not start with an organized structure. Due to extreme famine and wars, many Japanese sold themselves to escape difficult situations or to provide money for their families. They believed that upon reaching Macau, they could escape. Others were deceived and received no money at all. Typically, Asians were used for domestic tasks in Lisbon, where families displayed their Japanese slaves as imported products. The new business grew rapidly, but became a concern for the Portuguese monarch. King Sebastian believed that the developing market would tarnish Portugal's religious reputation in relation to Japan, especially since they were trying to bring Christianity to the island. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, known as the Great Unifier of Japan, was growing increasingly irritated with the entire situation. He was tired of seeing his own men and women being sold by the hundreds and decided to write a letter to the Portuguese Jesuit Gaspar Coelho, requesting an end to this type of business and demanding that the slaves be returned and freed. Some historians noted that Hideyoshi contradicted himself, as he already had relations with a slave trade in Masan, whose members were Korean prisoners of war. Nevertheless, Hideyoshi decided to ban Christian evangelization in Japan. Even so, the slave trade was not officially prohibited until 1595, and the relationship between Japan and Portugal had been severely affected by the entire situation. The Japanese now viewed the Portuguese, and particularly the Jesuits, as a significant threat. In the 17th century, ties were severed, and the Portuguese chose not to cross Japanese borders anymore. Japan became a potentially organized nation, populous, experienced in civil wars, capable of manufacturing its own weapons, and having acquired a large number of armaments from the Portuguese. It would now be difficult to imagine Japan becoming a colony. Another aspect that hindered Japan's colonization was its more isolated geographical location, making access difficult for other countries. Additionally, Japan did not offer other motivations for Europeans to send their troops there, as there was not much to exploit in terms of trade and natural resources. Other colonies in the Americas and Africa also occupied the attention of colonizers, and there was still the threat of the Ottoman Empire, which directly conflicted with European colonialism. Therefore, the reason Japan was never colonized was a combination of luck, explained by favorable geography and determination, clarified by military power and the strength of the Japanese themselves. Even if Portugal had not squandered its chances by establishing the slave trade, or if King Sebastian had acted sooner in prohibiting the market, it would not have been enough to ensure successful colonization. Thus, Japan became its own colonizer, and the Japanese archipelago remained untouched by colonialism during the 19th century. Several decades were needed to place Japan among the advanced countries. If initially Japanese products were considered low quality, in a short time the country improved them, assimilating well the teachings of the Americans regarding increased productivity. The Japanese adopted work methods that are now used worldwide, primarily aimed at eliminating waste in the industrial process. Today, modern Japan, aware of its territorial limitations and natural resources, seeks to maintain cordial relations with all countries, always encouraging commercial and cultural exchange. Independent of external suppliers, the Japanese archipelago has become the leading exporter of manufactured products, in addition to being a holder of cutting-edge technology present in almost all industrial sectors.